My phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning. I was sitting on my brother Gerald's back porch in Savannah, watching the sun come up over the marsh, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I wasn't expecting a call that early, but when I saw my son's name on the screen, something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Dad." His voice was low, almost like he didn't want to be heard. "She's at the house." I set my coffee down. "Which house?" "The one on Crescent Mill Road, the property you never put my name on." He paused. "She found the deed, Dad. I don't know how, but she found it. And she's there right now. She brought someone with her. I didn't panic. I want you to understand that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I just sat there for a moment listening to the marsh birds calling to each other across the water, and I felt something I can only describe as a quiet kind of readiness, like when you've been waiting for a storm you knew was coming, and you finally hear the first rumble of thunder in the distance. "Let her go," I said. "Dad, let her go, son. It's fine. Trust me." He went quiet. And then, in a voice that broke something in me, he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought her into our family. I'll get back to that moment, but first I need you to understand how we got there. My son's name is Marcus. He's 39 years old, and he has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness in equal measure. He's a good man, a kind man, the kind of man who holds doors open for strangers and remembers everybody's birthday and cries at the end of movies he pretends he hasn't already seen 3 times. I raised him to be that way. His mother and I both did. Her name was Dorothy. She passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer, diagnosed in the spring, gone by the following February. The cruelest kind of fast. We had 31 years together, Dorothy and I will tell you plainly that I have not spent a single day since she left, that I didn't feel the absence of her like a missing tooth your tongue keeps finding. You learn to live around it. You never stop noticing it. Marcus took it hard. He was 28 when she passed, old enough to understand the permanence of it, young enough that it reshaped something in him permanently. He pulled away from people for a while. Then, the way lonely people sometimes do, he overcorrected. He started needing connection too badly, started seeing what he wanted to see in people instead of what was actually there. That's how he ended up with her. Her name is Vanessa. He met her at a work conference in Charlotte about 4 years ago. She's 34, attractive in a way she's clearly aware of, and smart in the way that people are smart when they've learned to read a room quickly and adjust accordingly. The first time Marcus brought her home for Sunday dinner, she told me my house was beautiful. She said it while looking at the bookshelves, the original crown molding, the fireplace. She wasn't looking at the photographs. I noticed that. I filed it away. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know some of you are listening and thinking I was just a protective father who didn't think anyone was good enough for his son. That's fair. I've asked myself that question honestly, but there's a difference between a father being overprotective and a father recognizing a pattern he's seen before. My own father, God rest him, was taken by a woman like that. Not romantically, a business partner. Someone who smiled wide and asked questions about his finances and complimented his instincts right up until the moment she cleaned out his company's account and disappeared to Phoenix. He spent the last years of his working life recovering from that. I watched it happen. I was 17 years old, and I watched my father, the most capable man I knew, sit at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, because he had trusted someone who studied him before she struck. So when I say I saw something in Vanessa that made me careful, I need you to understand that careful is different from cruel. I was never unkind to her. I welcomed her at my table. I spoke to her with respect, but I did not open my books, and I did not answer her questions about the properties, and I did not let her charm shift what I already knew about how the world can work. The properties. I should explain. Over the course of my working life, I was in commercial contracting for 35 years. Dorothy and I put our extra income into real estate. Nothing flashy. Small properties in mid-sized southern cities. A duplex here, a single-family rental there. Dorothy handled the books, I handled the work, and by the time I retired, we had built something modest but solid. After she passed, I restructured everything on the advice of an estate attorney I trusted. The properties went into a revocable living trust. Dorothy's name is still in the trust's name, at my insistence. It is called the Dorothy May Leonard Family Trust. My attorney thought that was sentimental. I told him it was intentional. The house on Crescent Mill Road is one of those properties. It's a 3-bedroom Craftsman about 40 minutes outside of Atlanta. I've been renting it out since 2019. It generates income, but more than that, it connects to a broader legal structure that Vanessa would have had to spend considerable money and time untangling just to understand, let alone access. She didn't know that. She thought it was just a house. About 8 months before that phone call in Savannah, Marcus told me he'd asked Vanessa to marry him. I took him to lunch, just the two of us, and I told him directly that I had concerns. I didn't list them like accusations. I said I'd noticed she asked a lot of questions about what things were worth and very few about what things meant. I said I'd noticed that when she was bored, her attention went to her phone. But when numbers came up in conversation, she went very still and very focused. I said I thought she was intelligent, and that intelligence pointed in a particular direction. Marcus listened. He's a good listener, which is part of the problem. Good listeners are always trying to understand, always giving the benefit of the doubt. He told me I was wrong. He told me I'd been alone too long, and that I'd forgotten what it looked like when someone just had ambition. He told me Vanessa had been poor as a child, and that her interest in financial stability came from a real place. I said, there's a difference between wanting security and wanting access. One of those is about fear. The other is about strategy. He left lunch quiet. We didn't speak for about 3 weeks after that. Then he called me on a Tuesday evening and said, I still think you're wrong, Dad, but I want you at the wedding. I went to the wedding. I danced with my daughter-in-law at the reception. I gave a toast about his mother and about love being the thing you build, not the thing you find. People cried. Vanessa smiled at me from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. 2 months later, I called my attorney and made some adjustments. Nothing dramatic. I simply ensured that the trust documents were clean, that my son's inheritance was structured in a way that protected it from marital claims under Georgia law, and that the house on Crescent Mill Road was properly insulated within the trust. I also made sure that a certain file, the one in the old mahogany box my father left me, was somewhere Vanessa would never accidentally find it, or so I thought. What I didn't anticipate was my son's own carelessness. Not intentional. Marcus had a habit of leaving papers on his desk, of not logging out of shared accounts, of trusting that the people in his home were as trustworthy as he was. At some point, I still don't know exactly when, Vanessa found a property tax document that had the Crescent Mill Road address on it, and from that one piece of paper she started pulling threads. The person she brought with her to the property that morning was not a friend. Marcus found out later it was someone she'd been consulting, a man who billed himself as a real estate investigator. They walked the perimeter of the property. They took photographs. They tried the door. And then, according to the neighbor who called Marcus, they sat in a car in the driveway for almost an hour before leaving. What they were looking for, I believe, was evidence that the property was personally held, unprotected, attachable. What they found, if they'd gone far enough, was a county record showing ownership by a trust they couldn't tie to any personal estate without months of legal work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When Marcus called me that morning on Gerald's porch, the marriage was already fracturing. I hadn't caused it. I hadn't interfered. I had watched my son slowly begin to see what I'd seen 3 years earlier, and I had held my tongue because some lessons can only be learned from the inside. It started, he told me later, with the questions about the properties. She'd gotten more direct. She'd started asking him to find out exactly what was in the trust, what it was worth, whether he was named as a beneficiary. When he said he didn't know all the details, she'd pushed. When he said he'd ask me, she'd said, with the particular patience of someone choosing their words very carefully, that perhaps it was time he knew more about his own inheritance. Then he'd found an email. He didn't tell me what it said exactly, just that it was to someone she trusted, and that it contained a line about timing and about making sure things were in place before he turned 40. His 40th birthday was in 4 months. He didn't confront her right away. Marcus isn't like that. He went quiet, the way he does when he's processing something too big to look at directly. And then he called me from the parking lot of a Publix at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and he said, "Dad, I think you were right. I didn't say I told you so." I want to be very clear about that. There is no satisfaction in that moment for a father. None at all. I drove back from Savannah the next morning. Marcus met me at my house, and we sat at the kitchen table where he'd done his homework as a boy. And I told him everything, not to punish him, not to prove a point, but because he deserved to understand what I had done and why I had done it. I told him about the trust. I told him about the restructuring. I told him that his mother and I had always intended for what we built to reach him, but that it needed to reach him protected from the world's uncertainties and from whatever temporary circumstances surrounded him at any given time in his life. I told him that a trust designed properly is not a wall. It is a filter. It lets the right things through and holds back what would damage what's underneath. He sat there for a long time when I finished. Then he said, "Did Mama know you were going to do this?" And that's where I have to slow down, because this is the part that matters. Dorothy and I had one serious conversation about this, about 6 months before she passed. She was still sharp, just tired, and we were sitting up late one night because she couldn't sleep, and she said to me, "Raymond," she always called me by my middle name when she was being serious, "when I'm gone, Marcus is going to need people around him, and some of those people are going to see you and see what we built, and they are going to come toward him because of it. I told her I knew. She said, protect him without making him feel protected, because a man who knows he's being guarded gets proud and pulls away. But a man who just knows his father loves him, he stays close enough that you can catch him when he falls. I had thought about those words when I restructured the trust. I had thought about them every time I bit my tongue at Sunday dinner. I had thought about them the morning Marcus called me from that Publix parking lot. I opened the drawer in the kitchen where I keep things that matter. I took out a letter sealed in an envelope in Dorothy's handwriting. Her name for Marcus was on the front. Not Marcus, but the nickname she'd had for him since he was 4 years old. I slid it across the table and told him his mother had written it 2 weeks before she passed. She'd asked me to keep it until I thought he needed it. I'd been keeping it for 11 years. He didn't open it at the table. He held it in both hands for a moment, and then he put it in his shirt pocket, close to his chest, and he nodded once. I understood. Some things you open alone. Vanessa moved out 3 weeks later. I don't know all of what passed between them in those weeks. Marcus is private in the way that people who've been hurt tend to be. But I know that the process was calm. I know that her attorney made certain inquiries about the trust and received from my attorney a thorough and entirely discouraging response. I know that she signed the separation agreement on a Thursday afternoon in October, and that the settlement contained no claim on any property held by the Dorothy May Leonard Family Trust, because no such claim had any legal standing. I know she sent me one message, directly, before she stopped communicating altogether. It said, "I hope you're satisfied." I did not respond. Not because I was indifferent, but because there was nothing true I could say that would have been useful. Satisfied is not the right word. Satisfied is what you feel when something goes your way. What I felt was closer to grief for what Marcus went through, for the years he gave to something that was calculated, for the fact that love, which is the most serious thing there is, had been treated like a transaction. What I know is this: my father built something with his hands and his years, and then watched it get taken because he trusted too quickly and structured too loosely. My wife and I built something with our hands and our years and made a decision quietly between the two of us that it would not end that way. Not because we were greedy, not because we thought money was what mattered most, but because money is what the wrong people come for, and if you build the right walls in the right places, the wrong people eventually have to leave. Marcus called me on a Sunday, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. He came over for dinner for the first time in what felt like a long time. We ate at the kitchen table and talked about his mother and about his job and about nothing important. After dinner, he helped me with the dishes the way he used to as a teenager, standing at the sink, drying while I washed. At some point, he said, without looking up from the dish he was drying, "I read her letter." I didn't ask him what it said. It wasn't mine to know. He said, "She knew, didn't she? She knew this might happen someday." "Your mother knew most things," I said. He nodded slowly. We finished the dishes. He stayed until almost 10 o'clock, which hadn't happened in years. When he left, he hugged me at the door in the way he hadn't since he was a boy, both arms, and he held it for a moment before he let go. Some people are going to listen to this and think this is a story about strategy, about a father who was clever enough to outmaneuver someone who meant his family harm. And yes, some of that is true. I did plan ahead. I did make decisions that protected what Dorothy and I worked for. I don't apologize for that. But that's not what I want you to take from this. What I want you to take is this. The most valuable thing in that trust is not a property on Crescent Mill Road. It's not the duplex in Columbia or the account in the name of a woman who has been gone for 11 years. The most valuable thing is the letter in my son's shirt pocket. The thing that cannot be deeded, cannot be contested, cannot be restructured or transferred or assigned. The thing Dorothy left behind that no one with bolt cutters and a real estate investigator and a careful eye on the timing could ever get to. That's what she was really after, and she never even knew it existed. And that, in the end, is exactly how it was supposed to be.